Government has announced big plans to end the power crisis in South Africa, but analysts are predicting at least another 7 years of load shedding. We speak to Samantha Graham-Maré, the Democratic Alliance's Shadow Minister of Electricity. Welcome, Samantha.
Thank you so much for having me again, Chris.
What do you think of the revised Integrated Resource Plan?
Chris, we're still busy working through it as the Democratic Alliance so that we can have a proper position on it. At this stage, there are obviously some positives to it, but we need to really drill down into the aspects of it. I mean, it is so long overdue, and a lot of it is still worrisome in terms of the fact that they're reverting back to the standing firm on the coal strategy. They're not in any rush to eliminate coal as a source for electricity generation in the country. So there are elements that are obviously positive, but in the main, we are a little concerned about the over-reliance on coal that remains as part of the IRP.
Now, what about the memorandum of understanding that has been signed to give the Minister of Electricity more powers?
So effectively, the minister was appointed in March last year. He was then given ostensible powers in May following the sort of proposed changes to various the Electricity Regulation Amendment Act. Those powers actually gave him nothing to work with. He has no procurement powers. He has no powers over Eskom. He has no real decision-making powers. Any determinations need to be done by Gwede Mantashe or Minister Gordon. So he was really given powers in words, but no powers in real deeds. So the memorandum of understanding now is ostensibly to take away the risk of any conflict between him and Gordon. So while he was given the powers over the board, so he was required to actually meet with the Eskom board as part of his powers before the MOU, which he's never done. I must just tell you, he's never actually met with the Eskom board. So how you can speak about electricity as an electricity manager, but you've never actually sat down with Eskom and looked at a strategy for the SOE is beyond me. Nonetheless, he now has powers over the board, and he has some powers ostensibly over the management of Eskom. So hopefully that will allow him to make some inputs in terms of strategy. But he still has no procurement powers. And this is obviously where the problem comes in, because, for example, anything related to independent power producers has to be done via Gwede Mantashe. He's the only one who has procurement powers in that respect. So his hands are still ostensibly tied. I'm not entirely sure that he has any real new powers in terms of the MOU. And until they actually create an electricity portfolio that gives him all control over electricity, I don't think he's going to be able to be as effective as he'd like to be.
Now, what is happening with funding for the energy transition and with the bailout at Eskom?
So with the 254 billion rand bailout that National Treasury have given to Eskom, this was obviously to offset debt and to make them more financially sustainable. One of the provisions of that is that they're not allowed to incur any new debt as a power utility. So there's a big problem because obviously we need about 6,000 kilometers of transmission for the grid. We need to be bringing in new generation capacity, new transmission facilities, etc., all of which requires funding. We also have on the sidelines the Just Energy Transition, the JETP program, which is funding that has been put together by the International Partners Group. So that's countries like the UK, Germany, Denmark, Sweden, etc. So they've put together between 8 and 11 billion US dollars in funding to assist us with the just energy transition. So this would be a move away from coal into renewables and into other green energy so that we can start meeting our climate change goals. Now, the problem with that is that we still haven't got a plan in place. We still haven't used a single cent of this money that's available. But in the interim, very quietly, National Treasury went and incurred a $1 billion debt with the World Bank for what they called just energy transition. So I put in a question to the Minister of Finance and I said, well, is this part of the JETP program? What are the requirements in terms of this? What are the onerous requirements in terms of repayments? So it's $1 billion. According to the Minister of Finance, this is part of the just energy transition system, but falls outside of the JETP. But it's a debt on its own. It has certain requirements and prerequisites. I think our first payment comes due in 2038. So we've got, or 2028, we've got a 5-year, it's a 15-year debt loan period. And then we've got 5 years sort of in which we can start meeting those repayment requirements. And then we have to make payments twice a year. But my issue around all of this is this: are they circumventing the Eskom debt relief bill by using National Treasury to now go and incur debt on behalf of Eskom? So the country's taking on the debt on behalf of Eskom to avoid not meeting the requirements of the Eskom debt relief bill. Why are we not tapping into the just energy transition funding that's available to us? And I know that one of government's major statements is that we're not going to be dictated to by the West, because a lot of the loans and grant funding that comes out of the JP is based on what they call concession loans. In other words, you meet certain requirements and then you can have the loan. So government's response, as usual, is, well, we're not going to be told what to do. You know, we're Africa and we do what we do the way we do it. So my question is, why are we incurring a 19 billion rand debt? And is it to avoid, going against the National Treasury Eskom bailout bill, or B, is it to avoid being told what to do by the West? So it just seems to me bizarre that there are all these things in place around funding and loans and debts, etc., but then they're going round the back door to go and bring in additional funding and additional debt. So I will now be submitting additional questions around what it's going to be used for, how it's going to be tracked, how it's going to be monitored, etc., because there's no clarity around that either. I asked whether or not there was a business plan. There doesn't seem to be one. So I'd like to know exactly what they're using that money for and whether or not it falls within the JP project. And if so, then why are they not using that funding to make these changes?
Now, maybe talk about the 3 projects that fell off the table in December. How is that going to affect us?
So by the 31st of December, there were 3 projects that needed to meet specific financial compliance requirements, which they didn't do. Look, I think part of it is that Gwede Mantashe has made sure that any particularly renewable energy projects, the requirements to come on board and to actually be operational are so onerous that it's almost impossible for these companies to get their ducks in a row in order to meet those requirements. So that has been one of the ways in which he's managed to sort of avoid bringing in additional IPPs. But the one, obviously, that we are pleased about is the car powership deal. The other 2, the one was a solar project and the other one was another of the IPPs. And the other 2 were sort of worth about 200 megawatts. But obviously, the car powership deal is a big deal because they were going to put up three stations around the country, and this is a big deal for us. Personally, I'm very relieved that one has fallen off the table, particularly after what happened in Africa, where one of the countries, I'm trying to remember which one it was. I can't remember now. Sadly, I think it was Sierra Leone. They switched off the whole country. Now, to me, to have our entire country's grid in the hands of a private company is a terrifying prospect. I also think that from environmental aspects, I don't think car powership was a good idea. And also, if you looked at the cost of the electricity, it was very, very expensive. So from that perspective, I think it's a big relief that the car powership deal has fallen off. But obviously, it is now delaying the sort of improvement of the rollout of the electricity. So let's hope that there are alternatives in place. Look, there's nothing to stop these organizations from reapplying, because they now have to open up again to independent power producers to bring in those megawatts again. So they can reapply, and maybe they'll be in a better position to meet the compliance requirements going forward.
What other developments are there with the Independent Power Producers Program?
Not so much at this stage. I mean, let's be honest, Eskom is not coming to the party with respect to that. All sort of solar that has come online in the last year has all been private. As I say, they have found ways to make it increasingly difficult for the IPPs to come on board. They've lifted things. They've made it so unbelievably costly and so onerous for a company to get to the point where they can actually even break ground. I know that they are saying that with these projects having fallen off, they're now looking for what they call shovel-ready projects that they can use to slot into those gaps to try and, and that was very much a concept that Ramaphosa brought with him from when he was at Infrastructure South Africa. Part of what Infrastructure South Africa's idea is let's find shovel-ready projects that we can bypass. A lot of red tape's been dealt with, a lot of the issues in terms of compliance and enforcement have been dealt with, and we can just bring in funding and get them going. So this might actually open the door to other people who are ready to go to come onto the playing field and implement new projects. So it could actually end up being beneficial, but we'll just have to see how that plays out.
I just want to go back to the minister. How long has he been in his job now?
He's been in for 10 months. He was appointed last year in March, just after the State of the Nation address. But look, I mean, again, you come back to the memorandum of understanding. He's now been given this massive task. He's now, in charge of the board. He's in charge of Eskom. He's in charge of this. He's got to do that until May. And that's as long as the MOU is in place. So what on earth is the man going to do in 4.5 months?
And in all this time, he has not once met with the Eskom board.
No.
And that was not excluded. And that was surely not excluded from his powers at the time.
No, that was part of the original powers, was that he engaged with the Eskom board. And to my knowledge, he's never met with them. He goes off to the stations, but I don't know how you can get into a strategic thinking environment with an SOE without meeting with its board. It just doesn't make sense to me.
So you're not very optimistic that his enhanced powers will make much of a difference before May?
No, I can't see that he can actually make any major strides in 4 months anyway. And you can't just give somebody powers and then expect them to turn around a dismally failing SOE in 4 months. It's never going to happen.
Now, I know you've been digging for a long time to try and unmask the identity of the Minister of Electricity's secret funder of the multi-billion rand smart meter program. Any news for us?
No news, although there has been a slight change in tone from the minister. As you know, I put in written questions to Minister Gwede and to Minister Ramaphosa because I was getting no joy on the PIA request. I subsequently found that there's another thing I can do, so I can declare a dispute for the lack of information on the PIA request. So I will be following up on that once we're back in Parliament, just to say that at the end of the day, he's just completely ignored my request, and there's no basis on which it can be done where it can be ignored. But I can go through the information regulator and declare a dispute, which I will be doing. In the meantime, they have implemented 31,000 of these meters at a cost of 96 million rand, and there's still 5.3. It's a total of 5.3 million households is the objective at 16 billion rand. There's a European company that's currently got the contract to do that. So in my questions, I obviously asked about the tender processes, and I asked about who'd been awarded it. Minister Gwede has subsequently come back and said that they might not be the only company that gets the tender. So it's not even a local company that's got the tender, it's a foreign company. So South Africa is not benefiting directly from this massive generalized smart meter installation. But the interesting thing is that when Minister Ramaphosa responded, he stated that Eskom have budgeted for this project. In other words, he's now changed his tack from saying that there's this mystery funder that's funding the program to say that this forms part of Eskom's budget. So needless to say, I will be drilling down into Eskom's budget to find out where they have budgeted for this project and exactly how much they have budgeted for it and whether or not that is the case. But we will still obviously be pursuing the questions around whether or not there really was ever a mystery funder, and if so, who it was.
Any other developments or predictions you would like to share with us, Samantha?
Maybe one other thing. Last year, I put in I wrote to Eskom to say that we were of the impression that they had been lying to us about the stages of load shedding, and that on several occasions we were of the opinion that they had exceeded stage 6 and 7 and actually gone into stage 8 load shedding. And we wanted some clarification on that. Needless to say, as usual, our requests have been ignored, and we will have to be following up on that in the new year because we did quite close to the end of last year. So I will be following up on that. But the interesting thing is that in a couple of questions in the last week, Gwede Mantashe has admitted that last year, January, we went into stage 8 load shedding. He didn't state anything further about other months, But it's the first time that anybody from government has actually admitted to the fact that we did go into stage 8 load shedding. So we now have it from the Minister of Energy that this has been a case, and obviously we've now been lied to by Eskom because they've never ever admitted to going into stage 8. So we will obviously pursue that again to find out how many times this has happened and how many times we've been lied to. And then obviously, as we know, Eskom's own forecast indicates that the next 52 weeks there will be load shedding. So we know that load shedding is not going to go away. I know that there are people who are threatening to sue Fikile and Balula for promising that it would be over by the end of last year. I doubt they'll get anywhere, but nonetheless, we've learned as we go along that we can't believe anything the ANC says with respect to whether or not load shedding is going to end anytime soon. So I think we're in for the long haul. But hopefully come May, things will change substantially and we can start putting in a proper plan that will change the trajectory of our energy crisis.
Thank you. That was the Democratic Alliance's Shadow Minister of Electricity, Samantha Graham-Maré, speaking to Biz News. I'm Chris Steyn. Thank you, Samantha.
Thanks so much, Chris.